Breaking news. The Kremlin can expect nothing good to happen. It's not always easy to foresee political crises. The one that broke out in Russia in late June had been brewing for a while, but despite the conflict's visibility, it was difficult to predict how it would play out between mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD. The military-styled March of Justice that Prigozhin led to Moscow on June 24, which was broadcast live across Russia and the world, was as shocking, unexpected, and terrifying as the mob attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2020. That is to say, an armed assault on a country's political institutions is not something unique to Russia. The crisis was handled very differently by the Kremlin than it was by the United States government in 2020. The United States saw a full-scale public investigation of the events of January 6 led by the House Select Committee, complete with televised public hearings and a final report of 800 pages. There were about 1,000 people charged with federal crimes in connection with the attack. According to reports, Russian President Vladimir Putin made a deal with Prigozhin and exiled him to Belarus with a group of his mercenaries. Any further action is likely to be taken covertly, so observers will have to wait and see what the immediate political repercussions are. Some of the long-term effects, however, are already visible. Russia's military in Ukraine will continue to operate under a unified command in order to better coordinate their efforts. The political fallout from unchecked parallel structures is, in the Kremlin's view, too high a price to pay. It will work to prevent the emergence of another Prigozhin, a military operator with the authority to act independently and command forces outside the purview of the Defense Ministry. The initial step will be to carry out Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's June 11 order to incorporate all private formations into his ministry. The Akhmat forces, led by Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, have already signed contracts with the MOD. Is it safe to assume that the Kremlin now has complete command over them? Kadyrov is more likely to act properly if there is consensus that Putin's authority is safe. When that changes, his behavior could take a turn for the worse. In addition to knowing that, the Kremlin also knows that the Caucasus is Russia's most unstable region. Putin's visit to Dagestan, which came so soon after the mutiny, was an unusual public relations move on his part, but he certainly didn't choose the region at random. The goal was to dispel rumors of his political weakness and solidify his grip on the Caucasus. Outside of the public eye, the Kremlin will continue to implement a variety of other measures aimed at stabilizing military command and control and dismantling Wagner's structures and operations abroad. It will be successful in restoring centralized command over all military forces, but that does not mean it has avoided damage from Prigozhin's abortive coup. There are still major systemic challenges that threaten to undermine the authority of the Russian president and destabilize the Russian state, some of which were highlighted by the overly candid Prigozhin. The primary one is related to the Russian armed forces. It's inevitable that within Russian society and among the elites, doubts will grow about the country's ability to win the war in Ukraine. Now that it's clear Russian forces won't improve their performance at the front, the only remaining options are either a nuclear attack or damaging the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, neither of which are desirable. For the better part of a year, Prigozhin has harped on the ineptitude of defense officials and the ineffectiveness of the military's rank and file. The Russian people generally agreed with this message. After the March of Justice, nearly a third of Russians called for Shoigu's resignation as defense minister. The Kremlin is having a hard time economically, and that's on top of the declining support for and confidence in the military. The private sector is left to its own devices in increasingly difficult conditions, so the government has had to refocus the economy on military production and state procurement. The ruble's decline, the proliferation of Western sanctions, and the shrinking room for business are all taking their toll. The Russian people's inevitable poverty has been temporarily alleviated by increased social payments to the lowest and most vulnerable members of society, but this relief is fleeting. However, as the war drags on and the Russian government faces a widening budget deficit and falling export revenues due to tighter Western sanctions, its ability to keep these financial flows going will wane. There appears to be no bright future for the Kremlin at this time. These social, political, and economic pressures will continue to build unless we make some kind of dramatic course correction. Russia may not be at rock bottom just yet, but the aggressive war the Kremlin recklessly decided to launch is having a significant negative impact on the country.